Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Rochester Security Summit 2024, Day 2. I am asking that everyone silence their phones if they haven't done so already. And also, we want to have a special call out to our excellent vendors who are here this conference, especially ProArch and Just Solutions, who are sponsoring this room. And now, I would like to introduce our speaker, Jeff Miller, who will be speaking on Cybersecurity 2.0, and with a focus on NIST. Thank you.
Thank you. This thing bugs me out. Can you all hear me? And I'm sorry that I made that comment earlier about having a piece. If I start dancing up here, you know why. All right, well, thank you everybody for joining today. I'm hoping that you've all enjoyed the presentation so far. Have you heard about AI today? Have you heard about machine learning? Have you heard about automation, dark web? Is that kind of like the theme of the conference so far? A lot of these things. And a lot of that is really like it kind of goes with what I'm presenting on today, which is Cybersecurity 2.0. There's really an inflection happening in the market today. In MDR, there's an inflection happening in regulatory requirements. You guys are all familiar with NIST CSF. That's probably why you're here, and you're probably wondering what's different in 2.0. So we'll cover that topic first. The MDR market is changing, identity and access management. So we'll jump into those things. And I wrote a few things down just 5 o'clock this morning, hotel room thoughts. You guys have been there, right? So I'm going to try to tie it back to some of what other people have said at the conference as well. We may even end a little bit early, so 50 minutes is, if you have ADD like me, we'll get you out of here a little bit early. So a little bit about me. I've been here, this is probably my third time speaking at RSS. I really do appreciate the opportunity to come here and be with you guys. I would love friends, so if you want to link in with me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Sometimes it's business, sometimes it's personal. It's becoming the new Facebook. I think we can all agree. But just a little bit about my background. My degree's in microelectronics engineering. I went to Clarkson University. Found out along the way that I didn't want to be designing chips for a living in a lab. So much to my surprise, I ended up in IT. I worked for the New York State Attorney General's office. One night at 8 o'clock, their CISO was like, "Why are you doing this IT project management stuff at 8 o'clock at night on the help desk? Come and work for our operations team." So I got into their security operations center there and really fell in love with cybersecurity. From there, I started my own penetration testing company. Many of the businesses in this room I have broken into and was paid to do it. So had a lot of fun as a penetration tester. But then people would ask me, what do you do in between pen tests? Is there a net to catch the bad guys between these every 6-month pen tests that we do? And this was about 8 years ago, and I went on a soul-seeking mission and found that, hey, there's this new thing out called MDR, Managed Detection and Response. So I got pretty interested in that, and then I ended up spending 5 years at Arctic Wolf. You guys are probably familiar with that company, running the Northeast for them. In January, I moved over to Adlumin, and that's where I'm at today. So again, happy to link in with you guys. Some of the things I did before all the professional stuff is in high school, I used to sell lock-picking sets. My mother did not appreciate it when I would break into her Oldsmobile and then run around the house and then break into the screen door. There was a pizza shop nearby that was mean to me, so I DDoS'd them. They ended up going out of business. Not really proud about that. So now I'm wearing a white hat here today. So just, again, Cybersecurity 2.0, the theme of this is like, we're in a new era now. Like, there's these inflection points happening, and I can feel it, because if you go back behind us where these booths are, 2 or 3 years ago, most of these companies didn't exist. There's some that have been around for a long time, but so many of these companies didn't even exist 2 or 3 years ago when you guys came to RSS. So why, right? Like, why are there all these new companies? The new NIST framework came out in this February, and so that's the first topic that we'll talk about. It is actually the NIST Cybersecurity framework now. It wasn't actually called that officially until February. If you guys remember 1997, that was the best music ever, Chumbawamba. I get knocked down, right? But I get up again. In NIST CSF 2.0, there's this concept of cyber resilience, right? So I lived in Brooklyn for 2 years. It's like, how are there so many weeds growing in the sidewalk? They're very resilient, right? We'll talk about that in the NIST, in the context of the NIST CSF framework. In the MDR space, we'll talk about this movement from detection to prevention, not how fast can you alert me and what's your SLA to alert me that there's a problem, but how fast can you respond? And that's typically within milliseconds in some of the enhancements that are being made in that part of the market with SOAR. And then are you guys all hearing about quantum computing now? Is everybody freaking out that encryption is going to be broken as we know it? And oh my gosh, there's no privacy anymore. I will tell you that both the NSA and CISA do have quantum approved algorithms already, 3 or 4 of them that they both recommend. So if you're running some older algorithms today, just Google NSA approved quantum resistant encryption algorithms. They're out there. So you should start to make that plan for that. As of last week, I geek out on the news. I doom scroll. You guys do that? You just give me all the news. The bad guys are now downloading more encrypted data than ever, which they never touched it before, because if it was encrypted, that meant nothing to them. But knowing that we're on this precipice of quantum encryption, sort of breaking encryption or quantum computing breaking encryption as we know it, the bad guys are downloading terabytes and petabytes of encrypted data, knowing that we're right on the edge of it. I live in Saratoga. RPI was the first university to get a quantum computer. So there's leaps and bounds being made there. So I would consider taking a look at what the NSA says are good quantum-resistant encryption algorithms and starting to put those in place in your environment. And then regulatory-wise, I feel bad for NIST because everybody just plagiarizes NIST. And I think you all know that if you're doing NIST CSF, you're doing what the regulations say, whether it's PCI, HIPAA, SOX, GLBA, or any 3 or 4 letter acronym that you know. Last week I spoke at a banking association in Ithaca, and the New York State DFS requirements, they pretty much nabbed the new NIST updates with the govern function and changed the words up a little bit, but it's effectively the same thing. If any of you are in financial services, the FFIEC used to have their CAT, their cybersecurity assessment tool. They announced in August that they're sunsetting that in favor of NIST CSF 2.0. So there's really an acknowledgement in the market that the golden standard, as we all kind of knew it was, is the NIST CSF framework. And then we're also seeing within the education sector, New York State EDU Law 2D, Part 121, also is just a pointer to NIST. So it's really just everything is now kind of converging on the NIST framework. So that's kind of just a highlight. We'll talk about 3 things here today. Again, we'll start off with the NIST framework and 1.0 back in 2014 through the change 1.1 in 2018 to the recent last November 2.0. We'll talk about how the MDR market has changed. It got kind of stale there for a little bit, but there's new life. And then some enhancements being made to identity and access management. Are you guys all in the right room?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Very good. So just kind of starting off with probably the reason why you're here. Journey back in time. Back in 2014, then President Obama, by executive order, released, and this wasn't called the NIST CSF until February. We were all calling that the CSF years ago, but it was really, the name was longer, and it was really designed for the United States critical infrastructure, roads, highways, things like that, energy. And it was a collaboration. It was just academia, federal government, private industry coming together to create a framework to hopefully prevent people like Russia, China, North Korea, and folks like that from breaking into our critical infrastructure. Just how to anticipate, plan for, and deal with cyber threats. And you guys all know this in your sleep: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And so those were the 5 pillars or the 5 focus areas of the original NIST framework as we knew it. So that was back in 2014. It's hard to believe that was a decade ago. It feels like it was just yesterday. Don't hard judge me on the fact that I wear NIST t-shirts out in the public with my family. That's just like that's who I am. That's my son Oliver, if you guys are wondering. But back in 2018, so this is kind of like right when COVID was just pre-COVID. So the main differences between the CSF 1.0 and 1.1 was really a strong focus on supply chain risk management. Do you guys remember the SolarWinds situation? Like that was just like, holy crap. That played into the NIST 1.1 changes, adding dedicated language and categories for identifying, assessing, and managing supply chain risks. So that was like the big thing that 1.1 brought. And then there was some like limited guidance on how to perform self-assessments. I wouldn't say it was amazing, but how do I do this in-house? How do I measure and report? But I think it was a good stepping stone, but it's still missed, I think, what the biggest problem is, which is how do I make this a culture in my environment, and how do I get leadership on board, and how do I get it out of the IT seat and into the seat of every single person in the company? So that's what 2.0 effectively does. So you got to get a new T-shirt, right? Every time they come out with a new NIST framework, you see the govern function on the bottom here. So I paid my own money to get that shirt. That's how bad I am. So the title was changed. So remember, we've all been calling it the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, but it was actually the longer, 1.0 and 1.1. It was the Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity, blah, blah, blah. So just CSF. So the whole world was calling it the CSF, and now effective as of February, it is the CSF. The biggest thing was that bottom, the yellow there, the govern function. That was added to provide organizational context and the roles and responsibilities associated with developing a cybersecurity governance model. So the New York State DFS Second Amendment that was just passed for all of you financial services folks or insurance, that really basically borrowed from the govern function and kind of, in my opinion, plagiarized from it. And then they've added implementation examples. So many times I go to companies and everybody's trying to do NIST, but everybody's interpreting it differently. So I'll go and speak at a banking association and they all argue on, well, what's a privileged account? And when I do MFA and I have to deploy it on a privileged account, is a bank teller, is that a privileged account? Do I have to have them have MFA? So knowing that is a thing, people interpret things differently. What NIST has done in 2.0, and I'll have a spreadsheet that I'll pull up, is they've added implementation examples to provide practical and action-oriented processes to help you achieve the NIST subcategories. Basically like, hey, this is a control in a subcategory, and here's 3 or 4 things. Here's some examples of how you could carry that out in your environment. So pick one of them. And yeah, so that's the main thing. And then this idea of cyber resilience, and we'll go over a definition of what that is as well in a future slide. Are there any questions so far? I'm not trying to shout at you guys, even though I kind of am shouting, but if anybody does have questions, I'm happy to go over those. So let's talk about the govern function. So again, we went from 5 pillars: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Now we've got this govern. I hesitate to call it even a function. It's more like an interweaving between the existing 5 pillars. So there's, truthfully, outside of the govern function, there's not much new in the NIST framework. It's a lot of like moving things between categories and consolidating them and reorganizing them. But the govern function really is the most significant structural change to the CFS or CSF. You call it a function, whatever. And it interweaves the other 5 existing functions. And the goal is to help organizations incorporate risk management into your broader enterprise risk management programs, focusing on outcomes or desired states that inform what your organization would do to achieve and prioritize the outcomes of the other 5 functions. So it's almost like a helper function, right? In and of itself, it's really trying to make sure that you're accomplishing the other 5 functions. And really helping elevate, I said it earlier, but helping elevate the cybersecurity conversation from IT to the C-suite board levels, just really having ownership. And again, I keep going to DFS because that was what I was presenting on last week. And it even says for financial and insurance companies in New York that you have to have qualified individuals in the board level that's babysitting the cybersecurity, not just anybody who's given the title of whatever, CIO, CEO, but qualified. Like they have to be able to speak the language. And I do like that in New York State. Sometimes it pisses me off that we're so litigious in New York State. Other times I'm very thankful because we are really ahead of the rest of the country. And in 18 months, what New York does, the rest of the country ends up doing. So we're just getting ahead of it. So again, governance is so important that it's now promoted to a function. If you're not actively involving all areas of your organization in this effort, you're spinning your wheels. You're really never going to be secure. So I've pulled up one example of this implementation examples. Again, in 1.0, there was it was just, here's a bunch of controls, good luck, pat you on the back, and you go and deal with it. 1.1, they provided some limited guidance around self-assessments. And now in 2.0, and this is downloadable, if you just Google NIST CSF 2.0 implementation examples, they have it in PDF and Excel format. It's basically, on the left, it's a subcategory. On the right, there's anywhere from 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe even 4. Hey, this is what we mean when we say do this thing on the left. So for example, just to show what's up there, within the new govern function, there's a category entitled organizational context. And the goal of this category is to ensure that the circumstances surrounding an organization's cyber risk management decisions are understood. So context is important. We're not doing things in a vacuum. So that could include your mission, your stakeholder expectations, dependencies, right? We moved stuff to the cloud and everybody thought the cloud would be secure and it's not. Legal and regulatory and contractual requirements. And then it also includes understanding your dependencies on external resources like cloud providers. So I'm just going to deviate quick from the slide deck and just kind of show you what this looks like. Can you guys, it's probably a little bit hard to see, but you can download, and you're not going to really be able to see that, but you can download these implementation examples that NIST provides to help you get a foothold on what is new in NIST CSF 2.0. So for me, when I was preparing this 2 months ago, I was at a coffee shop. I downloaded the implementation examples, and it's all in Excel format. They have it in PDF format, and it really helps you wrap your mind around what is new in NIST, specifically within the new govern function. So I would say as a homework item, if you're somebody who's in the GRC side of the house at your organization and you really want to get a handle on NIST, drink a cup of coffee and download the implementation examples and just read through it. It's pretty plain English, and that's really the goal of it, is to make it plain English. So I would say that would be your homework from today. And if you want a copy of this, if you can't find it, find me at the Ad Lumen booth and I'll email it to you. It is available on NIST.gov. Again, I lived down in Brooklyn for 2 years. There were a lot of weeds in the cracks of the sidewalk, so I've got this little image to help talk about cyber resilience. This is a new term in NIST CSF 2.0. It wasn't in 1.1, it wasn't in 1.0. So what I'll do is I'll define what we mean by cyber resilience by stealing from how IBM defines it. So I'm going to read this to you. Cyber resilience is a concept that brings business continuity, information system security, and organizational resilience together. The concept describes the ability to continue delivering intended outcomes despite experiencing challenging cyber events such as cyber attacks, natural disasters, or economic slumps. A measured level of information security proficiency and resilience affects how well an organization can continue business operations with little to no downtime. So, and this is a new category in this 2.0 called adverse event analysis. And this is really kind of tying in what they mean by cyber resilience right into the new framework. And so this word context ties into resilience. Just really, do you have cyber threat intelligence feeds? Are you contextualizing your cybersecurity information? Or are you simply relying on your EDR tool alone or your SIM to give you information? To be resilient, you got to wrap these tools into people and process with the govern function to be successful. Again, I would say your homework from today would be to download the implementation examples that really make the NIST CSF 2.0 a lot easier to understand. So that's the first thing. MDR. Does anyone know what MDR stands for? I would hope that most of you would, because we're at a security conference. So again, when I was a penetration tester, I was paid to break into banks, hospitals, manufacturing companies. Many of them were here in Rochester, and I had a lot of fun doing it. When I would do the closeout calls and present my finding as a penetration tester, people would just ask me, what do you do in between? And is there something that would catch somebody because there's no continual pen testing, so what could I do? And really the answer was MDR. And there were 3 or 4 players 8 years ago that were out there. There were 3 or 4 players. Now if you go out there, I think just about every booth is going to talk about MDR and SOC, which is cool. I mean, it's cool that we're in a capitalistic society. It's cool that there's competition. But when I looked at it 8 years ago as a penetration tester, what you see over here, this is what the MDR market looked like. 8 years ago, even 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, it's this funnel slide, right? We're going to take zillions of alerts, throw them into a SIM, we're going to aggregate them, correlate them, and kick back. Maybe we have to do 100 investigations, and then at the end of the day, we're going to do 14 tickets, and that's the bottom of the funnel there. And look how much homework I took off your plate. But again, if you're getting that alert, even with a really good SLA, like 30 minutes or an hour, it's a post-mortem, right? And I talked to a lot of you at the booth about that. MDR as it exists today largely is a post-mortem conversation. Somebody broke in, somebody encrypted some stuff, and by the way, 30 minutes to an hour, you're done, you're down. Like it's helpful to know, but you might have even known yourself, right? You get calls from the help desk. So this is kind of where the market has sort of stagnated. And are you guys familiar when the market went from like blocking and tackling ports and protocols to true next-gen firewalls? We're doing deep packet inspection. We're doing layer 7 traffic shaping. We're doing the real stuff beyond just blocking an IP address or a port. When that happened, nobody went backwards. Everybody moved into this new category of next-gen to the point where the next-gen just fell off, and it's now just a firewall again because it's the status quo. That is happening right now in the market. And keep in mind, so it used to be 2 out of the 5 pillars, but it's now 2 out of the 6 pillars, which would make it a third of the NIST CSF 2.0 framework is detect and respond. And what's happening is the shift in the market is it used to be big M, big D, lowercase r. The response was, we're really just telling you that there's a problem. The market is now moving towards how fast can you actually neutralize the threat versus how fast can you tell me that there's a problem. My personal line is milliseconds matter, right? In sales, we say time kills deals. In incident response, milliseconds matter. So this is sort of like, hey, if somebody tells you that they do this, they're not a special snowflake. This is status quo for the market. This is entry-level stuff. Do you guys remember the movie Mall Cop? Do you guys know who this is? Paul Blart. So it's like, MDR 1.0 is kind of like telling you that somebody stole that purse in Macy's, and then Paul Blart goes and calls the sheriff, right? Because the sheriff can actually do something about it. Now, 2.0, or where we're starting to see this inflection today within the market, is really in the automated response capabilities. So if you don't know the term SOAR, security, orchestration, automation, and response, another fun 4-letter word for IT. Most of the MDR 1.0 technologies out there can essentially contain a host. I have a Mac laptop, this is a host, I can contain it. But what if that's your public-facing web server, your Apache server, and that's the billboard for your company? Host-level containment is like dropping a bomb on the situation. You're going to make it worse than it already was, right? So really, when you're going out there and talking to these MDR providers and you're considering that this 1/3 of the NIST CSF 2.0 framework, really think about the granularity of automated response. This is where the market is now moving, just like next-gen firewalls. Can I do network-level stuff? Like if I see that one of you is VPNing here from Rochester to a workflow, and then 10 minutes later you're VPNing from somewhere else in the country that's 100 miles away, well, that doesn't make sense. That's impossible travel. Kill that second connection, then make the phone call and tell the customer that you did something about it. Deep ties to Active Directory. So the more mature companies in the space are tying back to Active Directory. So not only, hey, a lot of you are doing dark web monitoring or considering dark web monitoring for your organizations. It's great to know that somebody's email or password is in there, but what are you doing about it, right? Not just knowing that it's there, but actually going and making a call to Active Directory to force a password reset the next time that person tries to log in. So it's really like tying all these things together, and that goes back to the whole contextualization thing that NIST CSF 2.0 talks about. Process level termination. So there's technologies that exist out there today in this space that can now with a certain degree of confidence in their source, say that, hey, there's an entropy change on a canary file that I placed out there, kill the process that tried to write to that file because it has no legitimate business purposes. So you need to look at that. Ransomware still remains the number one thing that we're dealing with, and it's now this dual threat of ransomware plus extortion, right? We had, so I live in Saratoga. We had, and I'm not going to say who it is, but we had a university in Albany. It wasn't the University of Albany, but just to be clear, but we had a university 3 weekends ago. I was up on a ladder painting, and my phone just would not stop buzzing. And you know when it keeps buzzing, there's a problem, right? Somebody's in trouble. They got hit, and the ransomware demand was conveniently $350,000, which was just about the exact amount that the cleanup was going to cost. And I feel like these guys are getting really good at their business because it's almost like, screw it, I'll just pay the ransom. They ended up doing the work through a local IT company to get back up and running. But had they had an MDR solution that had an agent that could kill that process, not host-based, but kill the malicious process, I wouldn't have been getting a phone call up on a ladder painting. The ability to update your firewall block list. This is something that newer MDR companies are starting to do. They're getting more confident in the machine learning. And I'm here to tell you, machine learning isn't new. It was out in the late, 1956 is when the term was coined. 1960, you had your first chat bot. GM started to use it. So we're just throwing a whole crap load of marketing dollars around it, and now it's like this big special thing. But machine learning has been around forever. But really, it's like, the response is now, hey, if I have a statistically high enough degree of confidence in that this is a malicious thing, take this action. A lot of the newer MDR companies now today are also tying in your OT. Does anyone have OT in their environment? Okay. Again, I worked in the city. A lot of like the systems the building systems would be like Philips and Siemens and GE and Liebert, and right, it wasn't your Mac and your Windows and your HP and stuff like that. So really bringing that stuff into your platform. Don't forget that you can easily get hacked through that connected vending machine, your smart lights, your smart traffic control devices, and they're, for the most part, generating syslog. Bring that stuff in. Bring it into your MDR platform. So if your air conditioning goes above a certain temperature threshold, somebody's getting an alert, right? Or if your door access control for your server farm, somebody's trying to get in at 2 o'clock on a Saturday, you're alerted to it, right? That can all be put in and custom rules created. So this is the inflection that we're seeing. It's like, again, the next-gen firewall change. We're seeing that now here within this market. And then lastly, a lot of people in the market don't really care to look because it's like, hey, we're paying you guys to do that. But being able to get reports to a board-level type conversation, I think, is important for self-service. And speaking of cyber resilience, God bless the people down in Tampa. Two times in a row, that was a rough one. Some of the MDR platforms today can even take a look at things like insider threats. Have you ever had an employee leave and do something nasty on their way out? Okay, was it you? Okay. Right. So I left the company. I thought it was really cool. I told him I handed in my resignation letter, and 7 minutes later, my laptop went black. I was like, that was cool. And I actually appreciated, even though I was leaving them, I actually appreciated that once they knew I was no longer an employee, I couldn't go and download the database, delete files, the stuff that bad people do. I wasn't going to do that anyway, for the record. You're looking at me over there. But things like mass file deletion, we're seeing the MDR market to where they can now, and not all of them, but the newer 2.0 companies, where they can now detect things like early stage things like mass file deletions. People will stage files for exfiltration where they're going to zip them up. Zip is one of the things. There's other compression extensions. And then start to slowly get data out of the environment and pick up on that stuff in the early stages. So that was stuff that, again, I've been in this space for a very, very long time, and that was not stuff that could even be detected before. And now insider threat detection is kind of main stage now in the market. So again, really, if you come away with anything on this part of the presentation, what it is focus more on the response and less on the detection. Everybody can detect that something's not right based on the machine learning that's been around forever, but focus on something that can neutralize a threat within milliseconds versus simply telling you that there's an issue. So we'll move. This is sort of the last thing. I knew I was going to end a little bit early today, so I do want to kind of open up for questions. I see a few people writing things down, but so identity and access management is really like, it used to just be passwords, access control lists. We have Active Directory. Most of you know what this is, but just to, again, back it up, ever since humans started communicating, we've had a need for controlling access to information, what we refer to as IAM. Even in the earliest days, the basic components of that control were much the same as today, providing who you are when you want to access information, which is the basis of what we call authentication, right? And determining whether you can access a specific resource or take a specific action once you're authenticated, which is, again, authorization. In modern terms, IAM is a framework of business processes, policies, and technologies that facilitate the management of electronic or digital identities. And basically, what can it prevent in the world of cyber? Phishing and spear phishing attacks, keyloggers, credential stuffing, brute force attacks. There's a reason why you need to have strong IAM, man-in-the-middle attacks, even insider threats. Again, this is like we start off, it's like, okay, tell me who you are, prove it. And then we have two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication. Did anyone think MFA was going to be the silver bullet that stopped everything? I kind of did at the beginning. I'm not going to lie. I was one of those guys who was like preaching MFA and saying like, this is going to stop everything. I guarantee it. And now my company has a really cool video online where we're doing basically session bypassing to get around MFA altogether right within the browser. So we have found that MFA is not the silver bullet, even with Authenticator and the two-digit codes and all this other stuff. People are still getting socially engineered, and session hijacking is the nerdiest way of getting around MFA, but it's fairly easy to do. If you can get in and get access to one system and do a session hijack on a browser, MFA is just pointless. You just sidestep the whole thing. So look up session hijacking and what you can do about that. I would take that as a takeaway for sure. Again, being in the state of New York, we're highly litigious. We like regulation. I mean, I don't personally, but we tend to, as a state, love regulation. So a lot of the newer laws, like New York State SHIELD, are you guys familiar with SHIELD? We're redefining what PII is. It used to be like Jeff Miller, 123 Main Street, his social, his financial account information, whatever. That was what we called personally identifiable information. And now things like biometrics, iris prints, fingerprints, things like that are now part of the multi-factor authentication. But also, and kind of just on the bottom here, I don't know if you guys heard this back in the summertime in July, the state of Texas was fined Meta was fined $1.4 billion by the state of Texas for gathering biometrics without doing it properly or legally with Texas law. So that was the largest settlement ever brought by a single state. So $1.4 billion for improperly gathering that information when they shouldn't have. There's this idea of risk-based authentication, and I know I spoke to several of you out there earlier, but just another four-letter word for your pocket here, UEBA, so User and Entity Behavioral Analytics. That is where you have a platform. It could be your MDR platform. It could be some other kind of PAM solution. But that's effectively where you're using machine learning to understand behaviors that are sort of a digital fingerprint for each user. So again, I live in Saratoga. I cover the Northeast. I'm traveling to Boston, New York, Rochester. Where am I logging in? What am I connecting to? What workflows? What does it look like normally? When am I logging in? Do I usually log in at 11 p.m.? Or am I usually going to sleep at 7:15 because I just drove 7 hours from Newport, Rhode Island to get to RSS, which I did. But it's basically this idea of risk-based authentication is on this new wave of IAM where we're looking at behaviors as a way of saying, do I let this person in or do I not let them in? So again, it's a lesser known term that I've seen out there in the market, but I would definitely do your homework on UEBA, which is, again, user and entity behavioral analysis, which ties back to this category of risk-based authentication, which is sort of on that bleeding edge of IAM. Of course, MFA's on here. We all know it. And we all argue about it, right? Something you know, something you have, something you are. Two of those categories equals MFA. The New York State Department of Financial Services in November released their Second Amendment for banks, insurance, and financial services companies. And they really put a whole set of new requirements under MFA because everybody was trying to weasel their way out of uniformly deploying MFA within their companies. Because, I don't want to hassle somebody with having to click a button. Like, you know what I mean? But really, anybody with any sort of privilege level access, at least in those three sectors, has to have MFA enabled on those accounts or any accounts that are used for remote access. Just because that only applies to banks, insurance, and financial services companies doesn't mean it's not best practice for the rest of you. So it's not just having MFA, but making sure it's widely deployed to every privilege account, whether it's a service account, a user account, and especially accounts that have remote access. That's baked into newer laws, and I think it's important that you do MFA right. But again, don't treat it as a silver bullet because, like I said, with the session hijack techniques, it's easy to get around. We've had NAC for a while, network access control. So that's just, you do an evaluation of what's trying to connect and create policies around that. Cisco ICE came out, and this is an older technology, but still pretty hot, considering factors like location, device type, network conditions to basically make authentication decisions. I'm seeing companies like CyberArk, Delinea. I ran into some folks from Beyond Trust at a conference earlier this week. PAM is becoming like a new thing that we have to kind of really look at. It was, I think in the last few years, PAM was something that if you had a ton of money or you were a gigantic bank or a big company, you would use or you would take a look into. But now PAM is this thing that I think everybody really needs to look at. So again, if you don't know what that is, privilege access management. Delinea, CyberArk, Beyond Trust, those are companies that do that. They do it pretty well. Also, most of you are probably using some sort of Active Directory or Entra ID, I would assume, in the room. Microsoft has, like some of this stuff you don't even have to pay for. Microsoft has built in ways of blocking commonly used passwords right within Active Directory that you could just configure. So, it's not like give me all your money. A lot of this stuff you can configure right within the environment that you already own. So I think really taking a look at UEBA would be something I would recommend. Privilege access management I would recommend. Understanding that in the MDR market, we've over-rotated on the detection and not done enough to look at SOAR capabilities and how fast can we respond. And I used to be proud to wave the flag of I have a 1-hour SLA for medium and I have a 30-minute SLA for critical. And I used to proudly beat my chest and say that to people. It's simply not acceptable anymore. It's not acceptable. By the time an hour elapses, you're fried. You're done. If you are going to invest, and this is a side tangent, if you are going to invest in incident response, make sure you're talking to your cyber insurance company, that it's on panel, that it's acceptable, that when you go to need to use it, that it's okay, because they will tell you during a breach, nope, we won't accept that IR company because it's not on panel or we didn't know about it prior to the breach. Well, I'm running into people who do that. They're buying these blocks of hours, 80, 120 blocks of hours. They're not telling their cyber insurance companies that they're doing that. They get breached, and then they can't even use their hours, right? So that's a problem that I'm seeing too, and unfortunately, it's happening too often. If anybody does want that spreadsheet that I sent or that I pulled up there, those are the NIST CSF 2.0 implementation examples. I think you guys are going to share the deck for today at some point. It's there, but you can also Google it as well. That was the way that I got myself really jump-started into NIST CSF 2.0. It'll take you a good hour or two at a coffee shop to really wrap your mind around it. And when you look at it, NIST has on their NIST.gov, on their website, comparisons between 1.1 and 2.0 in spreadsheet format, publicly available. And you'll see that most of what they've done is they've recategorized the existing 5 pillars. So it's not a lot new out of 1.1, with the exception of the very significant change was the govern function and bringing the conversation from IT to board level. So this is kind of like what my pastor does, right? These are the 3 take-home points when you go home, and be a good guy until next Sunday. Again, I think it was about time that we had this change. My favorite part of the NIST 2.0 framework is the implementation examples. We're on this inflection point in MDR now where just accepting the fact that somebody's going to ticket and tell you about it within 30 minutes or an hour is no longer acceptable at all. So look at SOAR, look at a lot of these platforms do have SOAR capabilities. And then really, if you're just, the last 5 years, we've all hurried up and gotten MFA, but look how widely it's deployed. Is it on all my privilege accounts? Is it on all my accounts that allow remote access? You might have gaps there. And then start to look at UEBA. That's not a thing that I'm not hearing much conversation in this conference about UEBA, and I think that is very important to understand behavioral patterns, and that ties back into the other presentations on AI and machine learning. So we're getting better. If you guys want to talk about this, I am a nerd. I do live in Saratoga. I get to Rochester often. Love to grab coffee, or you could just send me an email if you want the slide deck or any notes. I think we had probably ended a little bit early. I don't know what time it is, but are there any questions or comments? Go ahead.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but NIST just came out in July where they're recommending you don't need to reset your passwords anymore. What's your take on that?
I disagree with so many people on that. Like, we get into these internal geek discussions on that. A member of our SOC team wrote this treatise on why he likes it and thinks it's a great idea. I don't. I disagree with it. Maybe I'm the idiot security guy, but I don't know. I think it's good to periodically force password resets. I go against what NIST thinks in that case. I think the CSF 2.0 framework is wonderful and lovely, but I think the guidance that recently came out that says, hey, let's not force password resets, I think it's silly. I mean, like, if you have your stuff ending up in the dark web in droves, why wouldn't you want, like, every 90 days to have a password reset? I mean,
Tool to monitor that to make sure that the password does get exposed that they can get reset.
yeah, a lot of these newer MDR platforms do. They monitor the dark web and they tie back to AD. So maybe that's the solution. Maybe it's not an every 90-day thing, but it's upon noticing that hey, my credentials are in the dark web. So maybe that's the middle ground that makes more sense. But it's kind of like a 50-50 argument within my organization on, it's pretty well written. That whole guidance document is pretty well written. But I think that would maybe be a happy middle ground, if you were to ask me.
You mentioned about session hijacking techniques. Can you share maybe some tools that are being used by companies to mitigate the risk around?
Yeah, I can. That'll be like an after this conversation. I'll be back at the Ed Lumen booth. Yeah. What I will say is we do have a really cool demonstration. This is not an advertisement. Kevin O'Connor, if you Google Kevin O'Connor session hijacking MFA, you'll see this really cool video that explains how he does it. He shows all the commands that he's running in the command line. He's our threat intel guy. He came from the NSA. Very much like me, he hacked into his school grading system, and it was like, you're in deep trouble, or here's a very well-paid job offer with the NSA. He took door number 2, and so he's our threat intel guy. He still has top secret clearance, but we can talk more about that back there. It's becoming more prevalent. If I could just get on a box and get into the session, then it wipes out the usefulness and the effectiveness of MFA altogether. But it's a good question. We can talk more back there.
So you emphasize how widely are those capabilities adopted and how possible are they?
Yeah, I mean, it's really like when we talk about the MDR 2.0 slide and where the market is heading now, and it's, again, akin to the next-gen firewalls, any of the bleeding-edge companies that can do SOAR capabilities, they're using, under the hood, they're using UEBA to feed into SOAR, right? So you don't make a SOAR action without having the machine learning, which is what underlies UEBA to make the SOAR action. So it's becoming more prevalent. I'm trying to hesitate to say company names. I'm trying to be very vendor neutral per the policies of RSS, because I want to come back next year. But there are companies that do it. There's a lot of companies that don't, right? I think you have companies that are starting to really move in that direction. If you're making a purchasing decision, I would ask the company, what do you do for UEBA? What do you do for SOAR? I would say most companies are doing host level containment. They can't do process level containment. They're not making changes to the network, VPN, firewalls, right? So they're really limited to just dropping an atomic bomb on a host, which is kind of like the ballistic route to take. But UEBA is just an under-known term. It really is, again, just using machine learning and AI to understand behavior patterns of a user, me, logging into AD or Entra ID and an entity, my system that I'm logging into, and then the things that I'm connecting to and what's connecting to me. A lot of the platforms do it, but then it's like the real difference is what are you doing about it on the source side, right? So that's what makes something new and special and in that 2.0 category. But it's becoming more prevalent.
A couple of things, but just to add in on the password question, I think the overlooked part of that clause is the second part of the statement that says you don't have to require the periodic changes, but only change it when it's been exposed. So you can't just scrap the periodic change and say we're not going to look to see if it's exposed. Like you're saying, there's solutions, some are built in, and there's some standalone. They would have to have a way to determine that it's out in the dark web that's been exposed in order to then allow yourself to do periodic changes. So
Yeah.
I've had conversations with clients recently, like maybe we go a minimum of intangible, like loosen up on it a little bit because of the nature of what you're doing it. We want to, not just increment over that password and have the password 60.
Yeah, right. Exclamation mark. Yeah, yeah.
So, and I have real examples of that happening. 63 is a real number. It's recently because that's how many times the person's changed it. So come up with a way to have that in place that you know when it's been exposed, or keep your previous solution.
Yeah.
So just add a comment here on the implementation examples of the cybersecurity framework. On that page, I think it's the same page or one click away, there's another sheet that does all the mapping, not all, does some mappings. And it goes back to the system, back to NIST 853. So if you really want to get into more examples and implementation examples.
Even COVID, yep.
So, after you spend your hour or two, you mentioned the coffee shop, you might spend another couple days at the coffee shop, you can go through some other mappings.
Yeah.
Go out to the HHS site and have a mapping to HIPAA, so there's a lot of resources for mapping.
Yeah, they're really trying to educate people. And just going back to this whole new password guidance thing, because we're hovering on it. And I think in there, they're also saying like character sets don't matter anymore. Like it was like for the last 20 years, we've been like, okay, can't just be the alphanumeric. Now it's got to be symbols, but not these symbols, because then you could do SQL injection, right? Like no semicolons, but the dot is okay. Like, okay. And now they're just kind of scrapping that and saying, length is the number one thing. If you tried to waterboard me right here, if you tried to torture me and get my password, please don't do it. I don't even know my passwords. I don't know a single one of them except for my LastPass master password, which I have MFA on. I have a YubiKey token on. So like I don't even know. Like I just know that they're all like 16. They're like length 16, except for sites that don't allow that length. So that's how I choose to do it. Even after the LastPass breach situation, and we all heard about CrowdStrike over the summer, but it's still one of the best EDR tools out there. Sometimes we just have to give people a break because we're not perfect. CrowdStrike is still really good EDR, and LastPass is really good password manager. But anyway, I digress. Okay, go ahead.
One of the things I think people miss is that a lot of these are suggested by NIST, but
Right. It's guidance, yeah.
they're actually prohibiting hits. I think in that guidance, they actually prohibit it.
Right, because like my favorite color is blue, and I went to this high school. Exactly.
And on sites and everything, a lot of these things.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and that part I agree with. All right, well, thank you very much for joining.